All right. Well, welcome everybody. This is another one of the Land to Lake lecture series with the Cannon River Watershed Joint Powers Organization. My name's Ryan Lerman. I am the Rice and Steele County Extension Educator for Agriculture and Natural Resources. This webinar is being recorded. If anybody has any questions, please use the question and answer function at the bottom of the screen, and we'll get those answered at the end of the webinar. Today's webinar is going to be about opening the river. So it's about adding fish passages to some of the dams in the area. We're joined by quite a few different people here on this webinar, but I'm just going to introduce two of them for right now. So we have Mike Schultz with the LeSueur County Soil and Water Conservation District. And then our main speaker is Anna Holman with Clean River Partners. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to you, Mike, to kick us off.
Sounds good. Work on sharing my screen here. All right, everyone. Mike Schultz with LeSueur County Soil and Water Conservation District. I'm the district manager here. I am one of the SWCD members of the Cannon River Joint Powers Organization. Um, yeah, so I think my quick job here is to kind of give you an overview of our partnership with the Cannon River Joint Powers Organization. Um, we are a member group of 14 entities, 6 counties, and 2 watershed districts, along with 6 SWCDs in Waseca, Steele, Rice, LeSueur, Goodhue, and Dakota County. Um, if you're not familiar, I'm guessing you all are, since we're talking about dams mostly impacting LeSueur County, but one is in Rice County. Um, Watershed's approximately almost 1 million acres. Half of the land is agriculture. There is 10% of it within the metro region. And just a little more detail, there's about 800 linear miles of water in this watershed. So jumping in, um, what do we do at the Cannon River Joint Water or Watershed Joint Powers Organization? We are a collective group of folks that work together to do projects with our watershed implementation funds. We specifically are looking to target for projects for non-structural and structurals. Non-structurals being the stuff on the slide here, cover crops, um, native shoreline plantings, nutrient management, soil health work. And then our other big workload is structural. So water and sediment basins, grade stabilization structures, waterways, and terraces. You tend to see a lot of this on the landscape. We got some cover crops, some shoreline, some native plantings, and a waterway here. Um, just some of the things that we offer. We do have cost share opportunities. We meet on average monthly to have discussions on what we're trying to accomplish, and our joint powers boards meets every quarter. So we are non-structural. We have some rates in front of you here. We got some no-till and strip-till. Uh, we do a handful of perennial cover and some perennial crops, along with some of our structural practices. Our watersheds identified in tiered areas. So tier 1, we give 95% cost share. Tier 2 at 85%, and tier 3 at 75%. Um, so continuing on, if you're looking for cost share opportunities, I would reach out to your local SWCDs. NRCS is an option as well. We have some good partnerships. I know that our federal government's had some shakeups here recently, but as more recently have come back to the office and the people are available again. So use them as options. Um, And really, that's kind of the quick overview on the Cannon River Joint Powers Organization. I think at the end of the day, I think I was selected or asked to speak here today because some of the things that were happening with the fish passage and the dams kind of originated from some efforts um, within LeSueur County. And I'm going to stop sharing for a second here. And you can just see me, I think, if that works that way. But we as a district have been out and about, working within the landscape, and we had stopped at some of these sites. Maybe not so much the Schmidtke Dam, but The Gorman Lake, during some of the drought years, we noticed that that area had been failing. The dam was cracked and heavily eroding. Um, this is not uncommon. I mean, we're seeing these issues on all these dams. Most of them were put in what we suspect during the 1930s with the CCC groups, um, potentially just to stop carp passage and things and whatnot, what we're learning, and maybe try to provide some water quality benefits. And that's something I'll let Anna maybe touch on, but they're failing. And we've been working with the DNR and having discussions on how to manage this stuff. So we were at the time working with our fisheries manager, Craig Sapir, and just trying to pass some things along. And obviously, the DNR has a handful of staff within other departments. Um, and I think the intention was just to try to maybe do a quick fix on like the Gorman Lake Dam. And we had a flooding event that didn't happen. It got delayed. So us as the SWCD and the county were saying, "Hey, what's going on here?" And we rekindled those conversations. And I think when we were asking questions why it didn't get fixed, someone asked, "What about a natural fish passage outlet as an option?" And what we were trying to avoid is the dam failing and having downstream impacts. So we would just like the integrity of those outlets be uh, repaired. And so I don't think it mattered if it was fixing what was there, which at some point needed to be addressed, or an actual um, uh, fish passage barriers such as these rock riffles or rock dam outlets. And so when that happened, it kind of was a light bulb switch for the people we were working with. And they kind of navigated us to funding options and conversations. And suddenly we were eligible for Get Out More funds, and the Schmidtke Dam got the conversation grew. And so those things all kind of grew into this conversation. And so here we are, ultimately about 2 years later, it sounds like, pushing this stuff forward and having options to potentially fix these outlets, which we're in disrepair in some sense. And so that's kind of my connection. We were aware of this. Leesburg County has dams all over it, not just in the Cannon River watershed. I think more recently we learned that there's 28 of these types of dams within Leesburg County. And me at the district level, I do not know where all of them are at or have not visited all of them, but they're all in that same age bracket. They're failing. In another watershed, we're currently working on trying to remove another dam that has failed and eroded around the dam walls. So, I mean, with the increased precipitation and weather patterns, we're going to see this stuff continue to happen. And this conversation is going to continue to grow, not just on lake outlets, but some of these are in drainage ways, on Leesor Creek, Forest Prairie Creek, Sand Creek, so on and so forth, areas that we're not aware of, and they're back on private properties. And so you're going to hear more about this time as we're trying to address these things as they're starting to fail and they're aging out. So with that being the case, I'd like to introduce Anna Holman with the Clean River Partners. She's here to speak on behalf of, I think, the Get Out More project on the dam outlets. So Anna, I'm going to let you go ahead and take over, and hopefully I was helpful in giving you an introduction to that. So.
Sounds great. Thank you so much. That was a great introduction. Hello, everyone. My name is Anna Holman. I'm a conservation program manager with Clean River Partners. Let me get my presentation here queued up. Sorry for the spoilers. All right, perfect. Yes, so thank you so much, Mike, for that introduction. Again, my name is Anna Holman. I'm a conservation program manager with Clean River Partners. I joined Clean River Partners a little bit over a year ago, and within that year, I have learned so much about fish passage dams and rock arch rapids that I'll discuss more later in the presentation. Joining me today is also Jennifer Tonko, who is our executive director. Jennifer will be helping answer some questions at the end of this presentation. Jennifer, I'm not sure if you want to introduce yourself or anything.
Hello, thank you. I am here. I'll be off the camera until questions.
So just a little bit of a background into what to expect out of this presentation. I will briefly introduce dams and their history in the Cannon River watershed, provide some information on the impacts of these barriers in these river systems, as well as some strategies for reconnecting rivers, and then go over some of our past and present projects as well. And then we'll have time for questions at the end of the presentation. So I just wanted to share a little bit about our organization in case you are not familiar with Clean River Partners. We are a nonprofit and our office is based in Northfield, but we work throughout the Cannon River watershed. We were founded in 1990 and our original name was the Cannon River Watershed Partnership, if that might sound familiar to you all. But in 2021, we changed our governance structure and went through a name change. So now we're known as Clean River Partners. And we do a variety of work throughout the Cannon River watershed to improve its land and water. We do habitat protection and restoration work, conservation, agriculture, and crop research, as well as community engagement. My work at Clean River Partners is focused on our habitat protection and restoration work. And as Mike kind of queued up in the beginning, is we are working with the Department of Natural Resources and Bolton and Mink on a fish passage project currently happening in the watershed. This is called the Cannon River Fish Passage Project. I'll discuss more about that project later in the presentation, but really the goal of this project is to improve connectivity and facilitate fish passage in the Cannon River. So that's a little bit of background and why I am presenting to you all today. So I'm sure we're all probably pretty familiar with what dams are. They're structures built across a river or stream to hold back water, and they can be constructed for a variety of purposes, whether it's to impound water for, drinking water supply or control lake levels. A lot of the dams along the Strait and Cannon River in the watershed were originally constructed to provide generate mills and for the milling industry. Some dams can provide hydroelectric power or, provide recreation, floodwater retention, and diversion. So all that to say, there's a lot of purposes for dams, and they can be built for a variety of reasons. In the United States, there's over 92,500 dams, 6,575 of which are over 49 feet high, and then over 75,000 are at least 6 feet high. There's several more that are smaller as well. In Minnesota, we have over 1,150 dams, 330 over 330 are over 20 feet tall, and then over 900 are several feet tall. And again, we have some of these like smaller dams as well. I did want to plug this graphic. This is from the DNR's Dam Finder website, and it's a really useful tool if you're interested in learning more about dams across the state. You're able to click on each of these icons, and it will say if it's federally owned or state-owned dam or privately owned, when the dam was constructed, if it's still active, and things like that. So just wanted to put this tool in here in case you're interested in learning more. It's very helpful and pretty interesting to explore. So on the Cannon River, there are 9 dams that are still in place. We have the Morristown Pond and Lower Sakatah Lake dams near Morristown, the Kings Mill and Woolen Mill Dam in Faribault, the Ames Mill Dam in Northfield, the Billsby Dam in Cannon Falls, the Shields Lake Dam in Shieldsville, and then the Gorman Lake and Rice Lake dams kind of in that like Kilkenny area. So as I mentioned before, historically a lot of these dams were originally constructed to, harness the energy of flowing water to be used to operate mills. By the 1880s, just between the stretch of the Cannon River between Faribault and Northfield, there were 15 mills in operation. So it's a huge industry here historically. Additionally, a lot of smaller dams were placed to maintain, lake levels or control flooding. And then I did want to call out the Billsby Dam because it's kind of a unique dam in our watershed in that it provides hydroelectric power. And it also created the Lake Billsby Reservoir, which is over 1,400 acre lake. So pretty unique kind of dam in our watershed. So there are several concerns with dams, one of which being that, Mike mentioned in the beginning, is that these are aging structures. Typically, dams are designed with a 50-year lifespan in mind. And across the United States and in Minnesota, these dams are aging. The average age of dams in the United States is 64 years old. This is according to the National Inventory of Dams. And then in Minnesota, the average age is 61 years old. So again, they're really kind of beyond this lifespan of 50 years and are aging. It's also worth noting too that a lot of these dams no longer serve their original purpose. So like I mentioned, maybe historically they were used to provide power for a mill, but that mill is no longer in operation, but the dam remains. And there's several, situations like that where these dams are no longer really serving a purpose at this point and are aging. And of course, with any sort of aging structure, you run the risk of, that structure potentially failing. So between 1848 and 2017, an average of 10 dams per year failed across the United States. This is typically due to either like poor maintenance or poor design, and usually large floods, which, we are seeing more of recently, or improper operation. And so it's just important to note that when we're talking about these aging structures, that, addressing them now, and proactively, we're able to really determine, prevent that failure or, dam removal from happening kind of on its own, right? We're able to proactively address some of these concerns with maintenance and aging, by replacing them with like rock arch rapids or riffles and things like that. I did want to plug this stat from the Minnesota Dam Safety website because it's a pretty staggering amount. But an estimated 103 million is needed over the next 20 years to assure that public dams remain in safe condition, which is, pretty costly. So again, just important to proactively address some of these concerns in the watershed. There are also safety issues with dams, especially low-head dams. They create this dangerous hydraulic roller that can be very, very difficult to get out of. They're often referred to as a drowning machine. So whenever you are around a low-head dam, you often see these kind of danger signs that you see in the top picture warning folks of this hazard. I will also mention too, a lot of these low-head dams at surface level look very unassuming. So you might not take that risk necessarily seriously, but is this really dangerous hydraulic roller effect, specifically with low-head dams. Fundamentally, when you are, you know, putting in a barrier on a river system, you are fundamentally changing that habitat from a more riverine or stream ecosystem to a more static reservoir. And this has a lot of, impacts on water quality. So sediments or nutrients like fertilizers or chemical pollutants aren't able to really move through that river system, that they would historically have been able to, and so they can accumulate. And additionally, whenever you're creating more of this like reservoir of water, you're exposing a greater surface area to the sun, which can increase the temperature, and that, risk more chances of like algal blooms and things like that too. So, you're fundamentally kind of changing that habitat from that free-flowing river system to a more static kind of system, which is fundamentally different, and species might not necessarily be adapted for that specific environment. One of the biggest concerns with dams is that they do block fish passage, or they're either partial barriers or full barriers to fish passage. And we know that fish need to move through the river system. They migrate seasonally to reproduce and spawn. They might be optimizing foraging areas. A food source might be more prevalent in one part of the river system than another, or a tributary and things like that. If there's a severe type of disturbance, like a severe winter or a drought, they need to be able to move through the system to recolonize these areas. So fundamentally, dams will reduce biodiversity upstream of species, and then also within species, it can reduce the genetic diversity as well. And we know that genetic diversity is really important because that leads to healthier populations. If you have an increase in genetic diversity, they're able to respond to things like pathogens or, climate change. They're able to have more, genetic material to be able to respond to those potential changes and influences. I did just want to plug this graphic. This is from the DNR River Ecology Unit, and it just shows migration distances of fish species, which, one-way distances, which is pretty amazing. Walleye, for example, travel 164 miles, big mouth buffalo, 318 miles. So it just really shows the importance of, providing larger stretches of the river and system so that these fish can be able to migrate and establish in new areas. It's also important to note too that there might be more sensitive or intolerant species that again might not really be as well adapted to that more static reservoir system. Another concern with dams that might not be super intuitive or might be overlooked, but mussel species depend on a host fish in order to reproduce and complete their life cycle and then also establish in new areas. So, mussels cannot swim. So what they do is they lure a host fish, and once that fish gets close enough to them, they release their larva called glochidia, which then attach to the fish's gills, and then that's how they're able to kind of move and establish in these new areas, which is pretty unique and really interesting. Like I mentioned too, when you have this accumulation of like sediments in these, being blocked by these dams and structures, that can bury mussels and their habitat. In Minnesota, our mussels, 28 of our 51 native mussel species are listed as either endangered, threatened, or of special concern. So improving this fish passage also improves this mussel passage and diversity as well. So you might be asking, like, why should I care about mussels? But we know that mussels are excellent filters of, sediment and pollution. So I did want to show this video that the DNR provided of an example of this and just how fast they're able to clean the water in this tank. The waste product left behind of the mussels too is a really important component of the aquatic food web. And when you have really extensive mussel beds as well, that in itself can be habitat. So pretty amazing organism. So changing gears a little bit, I wanted to review some strategies for reconnecting rivers and some options there. So you can have a full dam removal. This is going to be the most comprehensive, ecologically speaking, way to address fish passage because you're fundamentally, restoring that river system into it's what it existed like before humans and things. So this is going to be the best option for like stream habitat. You're totally removing that dam safety failure risk and hydraulic undertow effect, and you're providing canoe passage and recreational boating and things like that as well. But we all know that dam removal is not always an option. There might be a downstream community or water levels might need to be maintained. In which case, a rock arch rapid is a great, compromise with that because you do provide some stream habitat. You're minimizing the dam failure risk as well as that hydraulic undertow, and then improving, canoe passage and wildlife passage as well. You can also have bypass fishways. These need to be a little bit size dependent. I kind of like to think of these a little bit as if you've ever driven on the interstate and you might see one of those like wildlife corridors over the interstate. it's kind of like a similar concept where that dam structure is still in place, but you have this kind of bypass to allow for fish passage. But again, it is size dependent. You want to make sure that you're not creating like a bottleneck or concentrating these species in such a high concentration that they might be at risk of like increased predation or transmitting like pathogens to one another and things like that too. For this presentation, I'll be focusing primarily on the Rock Arch Rapids design, just because that's what's being used in the Cane River Fish Passage project. So we're going to dive a little bit more into that. So for the Rock Arch Rapid design, each Rock Arch Rapid is going to be unique and designed specifically for each river site because each river site is unique. They are comprised of a rock ramp base that replaces that abrupt drop in water level with a more gradual and gentle slope, typically, 3% or less. Each weir has strategically placed gaps to allow for fish passage for a variety of species. And since most Minnesota fish species do not jump, those gaps are really important because they will burst through that kind of water column, and then they'll be able to rest and recover in these pools that are created in between each weir. So because this is a little bit hard to visualize, I did want to include a couple of the Rock Arch Rapids concepts. These were created by Luther Odlin, and they are, simplified concepts, but I think they do a good job at kind of illustrating this design. So in this example, the dam is still in place, and then you will have the kind of riffles created by these weirs. And again, it's usually a, less than 3% or equal to 3% slope. And then it's usually a 0.7 foot or less drop in between each pool. It will really depend on that site again. But just an example, and you can kind of see where there's like these gaps in the weirs as well. This is another example where the dam is actually removed, and so that Rock Arch Rapid structure is moved further upstream and is now that control for that water level. So this would be done, maybe if there's like an impediment or something downstream that would limit the Rock Arch Rapids from being constructed downstream. Construction for Rock Arch Rapids is typically done in the winter. This is due to a variety of reasons, including that the ground is typically frozen, so it minimizes some of that damage to the ground. Flows tend to be low, which facilitates this work in the water, and you're less likely to have any sort of like flood pulse during construction. This image was provided by Bolton and Mink, and you can really see how large some of these boulders for the weirs are. And like I mentioned before, a huge feature of these Rock Arch Rapids is that they will have strategically placed gaps to allow for fish passage. You'll look at the fish community and accommodate for every, the species within that fish community and size the gaps accordingly. Again, most Minnesota fish species do not jump, but they kind of burst through the water column. And so those, that's a pretty energy intensive process. So that's where these resting pools in between the weirs really come in handy. There's several benefits to the Rock Arch Rapids design. They require minimal to no maintenance once they're in place. Again, you're proactively addressing these aging structures and limiting that, risk of failure and things like that. It improves safety and recreation. Apologies for the train. Joys of working in Northfield. But a lot of these Rock Arch Rapids designs will incorporate like more flattened boulders along the sides of them that allow for, fishing access and things like that as well. It allows fish passage under all flow conditions, and then fish species will return, upstream after dams are modified, which in turn, mussel species will return upstream as well. So again, I know that these structures are kind of hard to visualize if you've never seen one in person and things like that. So I did just want to show a couple of examples of what these look like once they're in place. This is showing some fish movement at the crest of Fish Lake Outlet. But again, you're able to see fish moving upstream and downstream of the structure. This fish is a little bit hard to see, but it's kind of further back. And they're able to kind of rest behind these rocks and I also wanted to give another example. This is Pelican Rapids in Otter Tail County. I was able to visit this Rock Arch Rapids in person at the end of September, and so I went ahead and snapped this video. It's really like in the middle of the city and has really become a nice public park at this point, and it was really tempting this day to stick my feet in, but I resisted. But I'll show this video again. I think this video really does a good job of again, showing those kind of gaps in between these weirs and the resting pools and everything. And these boulder placements are very, very strategic. And typically, like the DNR will be on site directing where those boulders will be placed and things like that. So I did want to review some of the past projects that have happened in the Cane River watershed. In the watershed, three larger dams have been removed. In 1994, the Welch Dam was removed near Welch. In 2001, the Little Cannon River Dam in Cannon Falls was removed. And then 2006, the Morehouse Dam on the Straight River in Owatonna was partially removed. So part of that dam is still in place, but there's kind of like a rock arch rapid almost like a bypass that allows for fish passage there. But I did want to just share a little bit about the Welch Dam removal. This dam removal was pretty significant because the Welch Dam was really, blocking those Mississippi fish species from moving upstream to the Cannon River. So when that dam was removed, it opened up an additional 12 miles of the Cannon River to Lake Billsby. And then now fish from the Mississippi River can now freely migrate up to 26 miles. And then this news article from at the bottom shows some of the species that, were never before recorded from that area that are now being recorded in the Cannon River. So pretty interesting story. So I wanted to go over a project that is currently happening in our watershed, the Cane River Fish Passage Project. And the scope of this project is to modify the Lower Sakatah Lake Dam, also known locally as the Schmickey Dam, and the Gorman Lake Dam to Rock Arch Rapids, as well as replace the Dodd Road culvert to facilitate fish passage in the Cannon River watershed. I understand that in the watershed there's a lot of concerns with flooding, so I just want to be clear that this is really, the primary purpose of this project is to facilitate fish passage. However, LeSueur County is doing an Upper Cannon River flood study to address some of those flooding concerns. This project is funded through the state of Minnesota's Get Out More investment, which MORE stands for Modernize Outdoor Recreation Experiences. And this is a $150 million investment into modernizing Minnesota's recreation infrastructure. Of that 150 million, 10 million is set aside for restoring streams and modernizing water-related infrastructure projects, which includes the Cane River Fish Passage Project. So the Cane River Fish Passage Project received 1 million to again modify the Gorman Lake Dam and Lower Sakatah Lake Dam, as well as replace the Gorman or the Dodd Road Culvert, excuse me. This graphic here on the right, this is from the Get Out More progress report from November of last year. I'll have a link to where you can find this if you're interested in reading more about other projects that are happening throughout the state. There are some other, Rock Arch Rapids projects that are funded through this funding as well. So in total, this project will reconnect 23 miles of the Canyon River for fish passage, which will provide improved passage for 28 species of fish, including a genetically rare form of walleye. And I believe Craig Sapir actually did a Land to Lakes lecture on that walleye. It's the LMS, like Lower Mississippi strain walleye, I believe. So if you're curious about learning more on that, I would encourage you to watch that webinar. It will enhance recreational opportunities by, if you are into canoeing or something, you will no longer have to portage over some of these structures. And again, with the incorporation of some of those flattened rocks along the side of the structure, you have improved fishing access as well. It's worth noting that, Rock Arch Rapids are not bog proof. I know that there's a lot of concerns about floating bogs and things in the watershed, but they are typically less susceptible by plugging by bogs because the way that the Rock Arch Rapids are designed is that they concentrate that flow more towards the center line of the Rock Arch Rapids, which allows some of these bogs and things to flow through easier than if there was a fixed kind of crest. So the Gorman Lake Dam modification, you can see kind of an artist rendering here. This structure was originally built in 1936, and the plan is to retain that concrete sill to maintain the water levels at the lake and then install the rock and boulder rapids downstream. Both the dam and the culvert are fish barriers during specific flows. I think the culvert is about 1,000 feet downstream from the dam, so they're both, partial barriers to fish passage, and so the Dodd Road Culvert will be replaced as well as part of this project. The Lower Sakatah Lake Dam, this was the original structure was built in 1938, and then it was modified in 1994. The structures, the piers, railing, and bridge will be removed, and then that concrete sill will be maintained at the current elevation, again, to maintain that lake level. And then the rock and boulder rapids will be constructed downstream. I know this picture on the bottom was from 2019, where there's a pretty significant bog blockage. So again, just wanting to share that a lot of these rock arch rapid structures focus that water towards the center. That typically allows these bogs to kind of break up and move through a little bit easier. Just wanted to have a couple notes on the design approach. Really, the hydraulic function of these structures are going to match, as closely as possible the existing hydraulic function that's currently there in the watershed. So, we'll be maintaining the lake runout elevation. This is required by statute. There's a lot of regulations and laws in place that prevent, changes of water levels and things like that. And Bolton and Mink uses hydraulic modeling to verify that. The project is currently in the final design and permitting phase. The 60% milestone was reached in October, and we're anticipating that, the final plans probably will be completed within the next month or two, like early 2026. Unfortunately, I won't be able to go super in depth on these next couple of projects, but I did just want to mention them here. So the Woolen Mills Dam in the 2024 flood resulted in damage to the northern wall of the dam. So the city of Faribault is looking at options. They've engaged BAR Engineering to evaluate, essentially just taking this opportunity to kind of explore other alternatives to the dam. And so I would just keep an eye out on the city's website and see if there's any updates there. But I did just want to mention that this is kind of a discussion that's out there currently. Additionally, the Ames Mill Dam, this is a dam that was built in 1918 and is currently owned and managed by Post-Consumer Brands. Um, the This dam is part of the City of Northfield's Riverfront Enhancement Action Plan that completed a dam feasibility study, which is available on the City of Northfield's website. I have a link to that webpage too at the end of my presentation. But just important to note that, you know, there's a lot of momentum kind of in the watershed right now with these projects and improving connectivity throughout the whole system. So when you look at it at a big picture, it is actually a very exciting time for fish passage and improving that connectivity in the Kenai River watershed. So again, just wanted to mention some additional resources. The Minnesota Department of Natural Resources River Ecology Unit are really like the experts in Rock Arch Rapids, and so I plugged their website here if you're interested in learning more. I also have the DNR Get Out More link, which will include that progress report that I shared earlier, and then have a link to the Upper Kenai River flood study as well, and then links to the Ames Mill Dam website as well as Clean River Partners Kenai River Fish Passage project page. Both the Ames Mill Dam website and our Fish Passage project website have a link where you can sign up for periodic project updates. So if you're interested in staying, in the loop on these projects, I'd encourage you to sign up for those. Also wanted to provide my contact information in case you have any questions or, always feel free to reach out to me. I am not an engineer, so I might not have an immediate answer for you, but I'm happy to connect you with someone who does or find that answer out for you. So just wanted to share my contact information as well. With that, I am done.
All right. Thanks, Anna. We appreciate it. So we definitely did have some questions come in. There were a handful that came in kind of early in your presentation, and I think you addressed them. There's a first couple that I just basically said you answered live, and it kind of seemed like they were concerned that we were actually completely removing the dams and changing the water level. And from my understanding of your presentation, water levels are going to stay the same. It's just going to change kind of how the flow looks, so that way fish can get back and forth up and down the water. So.
Yes. Yeah, there's a lot of statutory requirements that prohibit, any changing in water levels. So we'll be matching those hydraulic functions and maintaining that lake level.
Okay. So this next question here, they're kind of wondering about like homeowners' rights and obligations. So, if it costs money to replace a dam, is a homeowner near the dam going to be assessed costs to actually maintain it or anything like that? Do you know kind of how that works on, would a homeowner that's near the lake be charged a certain amount if a dam had to be replaced?
Jennifer, do you know the answer to that?
I don't. I think that's something we're going to have to get more specific information on. It's certainly not part of the funding structure for these projects, right? That's the Get Out More funding. I don't know if it's possible to either kind of opt into that because homeowners desire the dam to remain in place, or to have that sort of imposed upon you. So we will check, and we can put that answer maybe on our FAQ or connect with Anna via email, Patrick. I will say, just in case, just to reassert that like those lake levels need to remain the same, at least for these projects. We are not trying to change water levels for these current Kenai River Fish Passage projects, which might alleviate some of the any anxiety about, what would happen with lake levels or.
Yeah, for sure. And that kind of definitely seemed to be some of the concern. So yeah, that's good that now the presentation's done, everybody kind of understands that water levels are staying the same. This is just to kind of help fish flow and passage. So
Hey,
another,
Ryan, sorry to, can
yes.
I interject with this last question? I just wanted to emphasize, this is Holly Bushman with Worcester County, that a lot of this work that's being done is on public water, which is maintained and operated by the DNR. So like a lot of the work that they do is not on private land, like land in general. So if it's public, it's typically up to that entity, the government entity, to make those decisions. They often involve the public and then get feedback from that, but it's kind of the DNR's responsibility to take care of it and maintain it often. So just know that there's those public those public structures are typically handled by government agencies. The private ones are a different story. So just wanted to interject on that. There's way more detail into that, I'm sure, than that, but just know that like it's typically not a homeowner's responsibility for public structures, if that makes sense.
Perfect. Yeah, thanks for that, Holly.
Can I interject one quick too with that? Mike?
Absolutely.
So when the Gorman Lake structure was identified as failing, the DNR, I'm not going to say totally took responsibility, but they became aware of the issue and they put it on their list to address. And it just the timing and the financial resources and things like that. They managed that. They weren't asking for local support or any local dollars at that time. I can't speak on the other ones, but I'm just as an example, it was on their radar to manage. And so I just the whole rock art rapids, the fish passage conversation didn't come into play initially right away, which actually um, this process still might be going into play if we didn't have that conversation because that dam, the list the DNR has to manage for those projects are long, and this was able to meet a specific criteria that fit their eligibility for those fundings, and it became part of that project. So just may not answer totally the question, but it just the DNR did manage that workload, and they were going to handle it when the time became available or the conditions.
Perfect. Thanks, Mike. All right, so we're going to move on to the next one here. So somebody was curious about with these rock arch rapids, what does the failure rate look like? What's the requirement for reconstruction after, say, a 100-year or a 500-year flooding event compared to the typical like low head dams that are currently in place?
So from my understanding, I personally have not heard of a rock ledge rapid structure failing. They are monitored like dams, so they're still considered like a dam structure, and so they still receive that regular monitoring by the dam safety unit. And so if there are any issues, if there's like a blockage or things like that, it's still handled, pretty much the same as it is currently with those monitorings and responsibility to remove that debris and things like that.
Okay. Okay. And then kind of along the same lines, how do these rock arch rapids handle spring flooding and trees and branches coming down, down the stream? How do they handle all that? So
Yeah. So in the hydraulic modeling and everything, Bolton and Mink does, analyze like 100-year, 500-year floods in that design. Like I mentioned before, a lot of that water is focused towards the center of the Rock Arch Rapids, excuse me, which does typically allow some of this debris to move forward and pass a little bit easier in case there were, like that fixed crest where it's still in place, or if these structures and railings and things like that were still in place. So again, if not to say that they're never going to be blocked up, that's certainly still possible, but that would still be handled very much the same as it is currently, if that did happen, if that makes sense.
yeah, for sure. So the next question, somebody was kind of worried about flooding impacts, and so then I think we've kind of addressed that to where, the level is going to stay the same, so it's not necessarily going to maybe help with flooding, but it's definitely not going to make flooding any worse with this current setup or this new potential setup, correct? Okay. And then so with the flood study that's going on, were these rock rapids, modifications taken into consideration for future flooding or anything like that? Were they part of that study and plans that went on? maybe that's more of a Holly question.
Yeah, so all of the current flooding events have been modeled and included in the flood study. The flood study is not done yet. It is anticipated to be done in the summer of 2026, but these projects are in the flood study. So all of the most latest, greatest, wonderful data we have is included and has been taken into account. So we did that intentionally because we want to try to get the most accurate current picture of what's going on in the watershed.
Perfect. Somebody was wondering about silting. Do these rock rapids tend to silt in easily? What's going to stop them from silting in? What does that kind of process look like?
Yeah, that's a good question. I will say, since, for example, for the Cane River Fish Passage project, since those dam sills are remaining in place, that existing, sediment that's accumulated over time at the bottom of those dam structures will still pretty much be stabilized. And that's kind of why earlier in my presentation where I shared kind of the three strategies for addressing fish passage. Rock Arch Rapids didn't have a 3-star on restoring those ecological processes. As far as moving forward with moving sediment, these rapids really do, they reflect that natural kind of stream riffle. So they do, they are able to move sediment a little bit more than just a regular dam sill. So they are able to move in that sediment. I haven't heard of any rock arch rapids kind of filling in and becoming saturated with sediment. Jennifer, I'm not sure if you have anything else to add to that.
Yeah, so it kind of sounds like most of the silt would probably be kind of caught behind that main dam setup, like it is now, and then that would mostly be where most of that silt would probably end up. So, okay, perfect. So let's see here. So the next one, Schmidtke Dam was fixed and refurbished in the 1990s. This means that the dam has not reached its 50-year design maturity. Why spend money on this instead of an older dam? So why is Schmidtke Dam being the one targeted, I guess, is kind of the main question there.
Jennifer, do you have an answer to that? I know you're part of those kind of initial.
Yeah, I think there's a few reasons, but one is just the opportunity to kind of bundle this work that's happening now. I think there's another question kind of earlier that got answered about, well, there's these dams and how much are we really reconnecting? And if we can do a couple that are sort of adjacent to each other, the funding is available and it's ready, and we know it's going to have to be done eventually. So it's efficient and effective to do it now.
Perfect. Let's see here. All right, so they talked about when Schmidtke Dam was redone in 94, it was to actually help with fish passage. And it said all it did was silt in the river. So what makes this setup any different? So I don't know if anybody knows about, what they're talking about when that was redone, if what that caused and any of the issues around that.
Yeah, I'm not aware of, that that replacement in 1994, but I will just, reiterate that these rock arch rapid structures again do kind of mimic that natural riffle system more. So, it should kind of be, better than what's existing currently where you have that fixed dam crest and everything.
I will
Okay.
add to a lot changes in 30 years and we learn a lot more. So what was done in 94 is way different than what we're doing now. And that's just how this conservation works in science in general. And I would say that's across the board for all the work that we do. I think that's really important. So there's a lot of things that we did back in the day that we would now think, why the heck did we do that? And that's just the nature of the beast. So we just grow and learn and adapt. And that's just kind of how this field is. So hopefully this will be even better than the last time that we did the work. I think that's important perspective to understand.
Yeah, thanks, Holly. So right now I got last question. So somebody believes that the Schmidtke Dam is got private land on both sides of the dam. So they're just wondering, is there a DNR contact information where private landowner could work with on these projects? So I don't know if anybody has DNR contact info they could share.
Yeah.
I mean, I think we're actually the main contact, so people should reach out to us, reach out to Anna, and then sort of depending on the question or the concern, we can connect with relevant personnel at the DNR.
Okay, perfect. Right now, no more questions are coming in. If anybody that typed in some questions and you don't feel your question was answered, you could maybe try and type it in and rephrase it a different way, or you could reach out to Anna with some of your specific questions there. She shared her contact info at the end. It's getting close to 1 o'clock, so we'll kind of wrap this up here a little bit. For everybody that registered, you will get a follow-up email. It's going to have a recording, a link to the recording, so that way you can watch it again if you're looking for more information. If it's okay with Anna, she can share the PowerPoint slide with Teresa, and we'll also get that shared out in the email as well. And then, yeah, if there's any other questions people have, they can definitely reach out and we can help point them in the right direction to get these questions answered. And then probably too, as this in 2026, as this flood study actually gets finished, then we'll get some more questions that'll probably help answer a lot of these other questions that people had that might not be specific to this fish passage, but are more concerned around the flooding and stuff like that that's going on. So. Somebody kind of had one last question here about Morristown Dam. So they were wondering about why that wasn't talked about in this presentation.
I primarily just focused on the dams that are kind of like actively have these conversations occurring right now with, potential options to either modify or, just some of these conversations happening about the futures of these specific dams. That's kind of why I just touched on the Woolen Dam and the Ames Mill Dam, and then, our project that's actively occurring.
Okay, perfect. I'll kind of just open it up to everybody. So if Mike or Holly, if you guys have anything else that you kind of want to add in or anything like that, feel free to unmute yourselves and you can talk and add in here. So I'll let you if you got anything else you wanted to add. So.
No, I think Anna did a really great job, and just I think this is really important to show folks that there's a lot of moving parts that are going on right now, and it's really hard to know what everyone's working on, and so just please reach out to your local offices if you have questions, and we can direct you to the people that you need to talk with about your questions. But there's a lot of great things going on in the watershed, so I'm hoping to continue that trajectory and just share as much information as we can when it's available.
All right, perfect. Anna, is there anything else that you wanted to add or anything here at the end?
No, I just want to thank everyone for listening in and learning more about the project. Again, if you're wanting to receive project updates and everything, I just encourage you to sign up for those on our website. I'm the one who sends out those project updates, so I promise I won't spam you or anything like that. But that's a good way to stay connected about this project and future meetings and things like that as well.
All right, excellent. Well, thank you everybody for coming in and spending your hour here with us, and we really appreciate all the information. So, with that being said, I'm gonna sign off, and we'll see everybody at the next one. So, thanks everybody.